Hi, everybody. Welcome, internets. I'm going to fade out my hold music once I can find the controls. There we go. And bring myself into the screen here. So I hope everybody's doing okay. Let's see. Let me go to my screen. There I am. I finally gave it to you there. And I know I just actually need to stop the hold music. I don't have a producer, so you guys have to bear with me. So, welcome, Internet and world. If you don't know who I am, that's who I am, Elliot Miles McKinley, composer, improviser, teacher, and lover of all things nerdy. So this is kind of interesting. It's a new thing in the sense that I'm co-hosting this live stream at the same time that I am um, doing a Zoom webinar. So, so I'm going to have an audience, if you will, that's actually live and in the room. And at the same time, I'm going to be talking to you out there onto the internet. So I'm streaming currently on Facebook and over on YouTube. If at any time there's an issue with the audio or something of this nature, that is for those who are watching at home, um, just let me know. One of the difficulties is that I have a presentation queued up, like a slideshow. If you've used PowerPoint, you'll recognize the usual PowerPoint. Some of that keeps me on target. I'm also going to be responding to questions from the studio audience, as it were, which is our webinar participants, of which we have 5 currently in the room. We had 9 registered, but somebody might join at some point. So if you hear a ding dong, that might be someone joining. So um, anyway, that having been said, um, it'll be a little bit more difficult for me to monitor questions from the internet audience because I may not be looking at that screen. And so I will take a moment every so often to look and see if we've got questions or comments. That is from you out at large, but I'm going to mostly focus on the folks that are in the room, and hopefully, when I finish sort of the bulk of the presentation, there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A. So at that time, there'll be a little bit more interactivity. So anyway, again, welcome. I hope everybody's doing okay. I've already said hello to my participants in the room. They will remain anonymous unless they choose to unanonymize themselves. I don't even know that that's a word. Uh, I'm also caffeinating with my composers at home, maybe drinking coffee mug. So grab a beverage and let's see what we can figure out vis-a-vis the academic job stuff. So I'm going to share my screen and myself. Let me just make sure that looks good. I might block some material from time to time as I realize I'm down here in the corner. So for the Zoom participants, all they can see is the actual slide. They can't see me, doing this business, right? But I am, well, they can. They can just see my camera. They actually see my green screen, which is sort of like the guts behind everything. Uh, but anyway, so if I'm blocking some really important thing, I'll try to move my way out of the way. But what this says, as I move out of the way, is what you won't learn in grad school but should be told. That's the subtitle, as it were, of the little webinar. So yeah, let's get into this, shall we? And I told the folks on the Zoom chat or on the Zoom webinar room that they could chime in with questions anytime. So we might be fielding questions as we go along, and maybe they'll be the same questions as you at home. So let's move on to the next slide. So yes, welcome. So this webinar is and discussion is really designed for those who are either pre-graduate or considering graduate education in music, for those who are currently in a graduate program or a PhD or DMA program and are pre-job market, post-job or postgraduate who are on the job market and perhaps do not have a job yet outside of whatever you might have done in terms of graduate teaching stuff. The underemployed, which basically means adjuncts, who are post-grad, of course, or sometimes the adjuncts are actually in like ABD or something like this. And then also, it's a little bit towards the end, and I certainly will talk about this if you want, talk about some things that I've learned while being on the tenure track. So it's going to try to cover a lot of different potential audiences here. I know that in the Zoom room, well, I know Josh and Emily and Melissa some, uh, so I kind of know where they are a little bit, not, but I haven't talked to them for a long time. So, but anyway, wherever you are, I hope that this information is useful. And if you're watching on a recording, ask me questions on the comments if you're watching on the YouTube for later. So anyway, let's move on to yes, and of course, if you're tenured and you happen to be watching, grab yourself a beer because congratulations, you made it to a fairly precious position in academia, and that is that of the tenured professor. So that is not meant to be facetious. It's just, you earned it. If you're tenured, you earned it. So here we go. Yeah, when I was thinking about doing this presentation, and I have done versions of this presentation in the past at schools. I've done the University of Minnesota, which is where I got my doctorate about 15 years ago now. I've done a couple of these in different ways. And it's very hard. Well, it can be easy, let's put it this way, to be cynical about all of this. When you hear me start talking, um, you know, going down a cynical pathway and is easy. The cynicism of like the difficulty of the process, the current climate, et cetera, can easily generate cynicism. But um, I will not do that, or at least I will really strongly attempt not to do that. My goal here is to be real with you. So therefore, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you a rosy picture of something that isn't that rosy. But at the same time, I'm going to also tell you that if you really want to do this and you're serious about going this direction in terms of a career path, that it is and can be very rewarding, and it is a very good job to have. It may not pay the best in terms of jobs, especially in music and the arts. We tend to be on the lower end of the pay scale when it comes to our colleagues, let's say over in engineering or the hard sciences, whatever the case may be. But it can be really worth it, and I can tell you a lot of things that are worth the effort. Yeah, and then the last two things, I'm not here to talk you out of doing it, and I'm also not really here to sell it to you either. Okay, so these are things to just keep in mind as I ramble forward in this presentation. So I thought it would be good to, because this is especially for those who might be considering a PhD or DMA and aren't already in a program or already postgraduate. What a PhD or a DMA is not. And those are my 3 points. It's not a guarantee that you're a good composer or researcher, or whatever else you're doing, whatever else you got your degree in. It doesn't guarantee that you're good at it. That might seem contradictory, but it isn't, because you'll see on my next slide what a PhD actually is. That doesn't mean that you're not good at it. It just doesn't guarantee that you're good at it. And that by getting a PhD doesn't automatically sort of say, hey, I've got the certificate of goodness. And that's a paradigm too, right? So, or to that point that you're a good teacher. And I can tell you that most doctoral programs do not even address the issue of things like teaching pedagogy, classroom management, any of this stuff just doesn't get taught. It was not taught in my PhD program, not in the program itself. There were courses at the university that I actually sought out and took because I thought, hey, if I'm going to go into this, I probably should learn something about, I don't know, pedagogy. So, we can address that as we go further down the road here. And it doesn't also guarantee you a promise that you're going to get a job. Okay, so the piece of paper that you get gives you the right to apply for a job, but it doesn't guarantee you a job. So those are, if you didn't know that already, now you do. So the most important thing for me and from my experience is that a doctoral program gives you time. Now, yes, you have to do a lot of work. There's a lot of busy work, et cetera, et cetera. But nonetheless, it gives you time that otherwise you don't have in life to focus on whatever it is that you're focusing on. Okay, to focus on your craft, et cetera, to reflect um, on what it is you want to do as an artist or researcher, whatever the case may be. And perhaps one of the most obvious but undersold aspects of a doctoral program is that this is where often you make long-term personal and professional connections with colleagues, which, as I parenthesize there, can be hugely valuable. They can pay long dividends. Okay, so regardless of what happens, regardless of whether you get a job or you become a professor or whatever the case may be, the value of that experience and time and reflection and developing relationships with like-minded people, um, that's really where all the value is. And so that's kind of why I still think getting a doctorate is not a bad thing, despite the fact that the academic climate is fairly poor at the moment and has been for a while. So yeah, so let's get into the realities. I mean, this is not Debbie Downer stuff, but this is just reality. Reality check are all of these little boxes that I have in front of you, and I probably could make more of them. But in general, higher education has been under siege, both public and private, for, well, going back to the 80s, really the Reagan administration largely, but you could point fingers at any number of people and political parties and whatnot. But essentially, it's been a slow starve, right? Slow starvation. So what we've seen, which I think if you're a recent student, what we've seen, of course, is the rising costs of college education. It was a big political subject in for the last, it's been a big such subject for a while, but finally it's being actually talked about as providing things like student loan debt relief and college tuition relief and so on and so forth. People like Bernie Sanders, who really brought this to the forefront politically back in 2016. So, but there's been this rising cost of education and rising tuition, and at the same time, the universities are also one of the reasons for this is that they have been forced to work the same with less money, less public subsidy. And there's less public subsidy not only for the universities, but also for the students. Um, this has also led to corporatization, as one of my little boxes says. In other words, administrations have become, at some universities, have become corporatized. The idea is that maybe this is the way to save the university, is to essentially adopt a corporate business model, which has failed. That is something that I think currently higher education is grappling with, the idea that corporatization of higher education is not a winning strategy. It has led to worse results, mostly worse results, maybe not in all cases. Uh, Administrative bloat, which means basically now there's a dean that does something and we don't know what that dean is. That happens everywhere. It's sort of, I used to joke about getting an email about, well, would love, you'll be happy to know we've hired so and so as dean of something, and I never even knew the dean of something even existed. And it's like suddenly there's all these deans and provosts that come out of nowhere. The larger the institution, the more deans and vice deans and provosts and assistant deans and associate deans that you have, and you just don't really know what these people are doing. That's not to say that they're not doing valuable things or they're not needed, but it just, the administrations at higher education have become larger. And they also, um, as much as they like to complain about salaries for professors, they're usually collecting a fairly handsome salary, much, uh, let's put it this way. I don't want to use figures, but they're higher than most faculty members tend to get. And then what happens is the backfill, because we still need to teach the students. The adjunct market has exploded, which has meant essentially the underemployment of many PhDs. The fact that tenure lines and full-time positions have been cut and are being essentially replaced with adjunct or part-time, or maybe in the best case scenario, visiting or one-year lecturer positions. Um, which has led to mistrust between administration and faculty. Um, there's COVID-19, and there's also changing demographics and the focus on essentially job producing degrees, things like STEM, which is great. I mean, we need that, but we're in the arts. Even at my institution very recently, my administrators have been sort of pushing these kind of interdisciplinary programs, and they have completely ignored us, the arts. They talk about everything else, and then like we're like, well, hello, we're over here too. By the way, we're part of the university, so it's just a focus on essentially what's driving the university is essentially the students' desire to get jobs, which of course is that's a understandable desire. Uh, but those tend to then get front loaded, and things like the arts and humanities tend to get put into the back seat. Okay. Let's see. Do I have a question? Chat. Yes, I have one on the chat, which is where? Where is my chat box? I just lost my. Sorry, folks at home. Oh, here. I remember when it used to be called Steam. Oh, yeah, Ian. Yeah, I just saw the chat box just vanished and then came back. Um, yeah, yeah. We've we as in my institution have been reminding the administration that there is an A in STEM. It's called STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Um, anyway, all right, let's go on. And again, I have to be real with you because this isn't what um, this isn't the kind of thing that they're going to tell you at graduate orientation of any PhD program or DMA program, right? They're not interested in telling you all of this, even though everyone knows that's what's happening. So there you have it. I anticipated my own next slide, right? They should share this information. And I understand it because they don't want to scare students away, right? If you were like, I want to be a college professor and I love music, and so I want to be a music professor, or I want to do this, or do that, and then you go and your first day of graduate school is them telling you all of the things that are wrong with higher education, that might, lead you out the door and asking for a refund. But hold on, like I said, there's a lot of value in the process, and a lot of value in fighting for uh, fighting for becoming a professor or a teacher at the college level. So, um, yeah, so this kind of brings us to this next things. So you've got your doctorate. So now what? So now we're going to get into a little bit into some nuts and bolts. And that is first the job search. Where to go look for jobs? Well, these are linked, but and I'll share this with my webinar guests after the webinar. But probably most of you who have been looking for jobs probably know these sources. There are others, but these are the ones that I had checked. There's higheredjobs.com. There's the Wikia, which is the, depending on your subject area, there's the academic jobs Wikia. So for me, it was there's a theory composition Wikia, and that actually tends to be pretty complete. And that's authored by those who are seeking jobs, uh, and sometimes also those who are advertising for jobs. And there you can also find out little tidbits of information about whether um, and if you're interested, when we get to Q&A, I can maybe fire up the web page and we can look at this directly. Is They'll say, oh, phone interviews were scheduled or whatever. So if you've applied for something and you're wondering why you haven't heard from a particular institution, you may be able to go there and actually find out whether or not they've moved on with their process, or what their process, where they're at. Then there's the Chronicle of Higher Education. And then there's the College Music Society. I can't pull up that page right now because I haven't renewed my membership in CMS this year. Not because I don't like CMS. I've had other things to do, and it's not that important right now for me to be looking at job market. So I'm fortunate that way. But if you are looking for jobs, being a member of CMS is advisable, and they often have very focused job opportunities. The job opportunities at CMS tend to be the ones that are posted by fairly serious programs, really interested in looking for high quality candidates. Higher ed jobs, interestingly enough, will tend to advertise almost all kinds of jobs. That also includes community college jobs, which I should not dismiss, but I shouldn't ignore, that there are a lot of community college positions that are looking for music instructors, and that can be a a good career opportunity, not just teaching at the traditional four-year college or university or graduate programs, whatever the case may be. So, um, so the job search, the postings, reading a job search, and this might be something we can do after I do my little show and tell here, or maybe we can call up a web page and look at a job posting and find out, well, what is this job posting really telling you? But the general points are, when you look at a job posting, is to look very carefully at the qualifications uh, and the fine print. Now, what do I mean by fine print? Well, um, that is, job postings fall usually into two categories. There's a category of cast a wide net. And so the fine print will be, we're looking for somebody who can teach ear training, our morning ear training classes, teach, uh, um, you know, uh, composition projects, uh, but we also would be interested in someone who can teach bassoon, run the chorus, do the new music ensemble, and like, in other words, there'll be this laundry list of things that'll be advertised. Some of them will just seem like, wow, that doesn't seem like it goes together. And that could be one of two things. That could be either we want to try to get as qualified a person with as many different areas of experience as is possible, because it's usually a small program. And so small programs often don't have too many opportunities to hire a full-time person. And so they try to get the most, if you will, bang for their buck. They're going to try to get somebody who can do as many things as possible, so that they can have a multifaceted person in that music position. The flip side of it is, which is point number two, is look at the program department to see if there's an internal candidate. So go and look at the faculty, look at the program, look at the website. Because if they're asking for things that seem too good to be true, like, or too crazy to be true, like, we want somebody who can teach uh, um, low brass, um, the music of Senegal, and also do ear training, then you go and you look and you'll find maybe that there is a visiting professor or a adjunct or some lecturer, and you'll read and suddenly it's be like, oh, so and so has a doctorate in low brass performance, but also has taught ear training for 15 years at this community college and happens to make yearly trips to Senegal for studies on whatever. I mean, in other words, you've got you have to look and see, and sometimes you'll find the candidate that they're actually advertising for. Now, does that mean don't apply? If you see that, it doesn't mean don't apply. If you have those qualifications, then you should apply because an internal candidate, of which many jobs have internal candidates, an internal candidate doesn't automatically mean that's not a guarantee that you're going to get the job. So if you happen to be a visiting professor at a school and the department likes you and they write a job call that pretty much hits all your strong points, that's a good sign. But there always could be the person that comes in the door that totally wows the committee, that has everything that you do and maybe has some X factor that you don't have and gets the job. It happens. And that's something, maybe we can talk about that. That can be incredibly disappointing when that happens. It hasn't happened to me, but I know colleagues who have had sometimes a part-time or sorry, a full-time position for several years and was very well liked by students and the program, and then suddenly gets replaced by someone else. And that's a thing that happens. So uh, there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but know that maybe it was for the best. So let's move on about job search application materials. Now, those of you who've been applying for jobs probably will recognize the four categories here of the cover letter, the CV, reference letters or reference lists, and in some cases examples. So this is often these are often requested. At least the first three are often requested. The cover letter, absolutely, and the CV, your curriculum vitae, or vita, depending on how you want to say it. And then the references and letters. I've noticed over the last maybe 4 or 5 years that a lot of job calls are not asking for letters up front, but rather asking for a list of contacts, a list of references that for whom they could contact to ask about you if you get that far in the job process. Um, but sometimes they'll actually ask for letters. They want letters up front. So that's just I think depends on the what the committee is looking for and the institution, et cetera, their process. Example scores or examples of scholarly research, whatever the case may be, that's kind of a hit or miss. Um, some job calls will ask for that and they'll say submit 3 examples of this or that. Um, and that just means that they probably don't want to ask for it later, or they just want to have maybe they've got some other kind of process. But a lot of times, probably 2/3 of the times, there's usually no request for samples. And by the way, don't send samples if you're not asked to send samples. That's the first thing that'll get you off the stack of applicants. There are other things too. So that's kind of the next slide. Oh, yeah. Some considerations on the other side of the table. So I just mentioned one of them. If you did not follow the instructions in the job call, you will immediately be cut. That just happens. Okay. We can talk about how many job applications there usually are for any particular job. And I can give you a couple of pieces of information based on my experience. So my first job, so the very first job I got was a tenure track position at Indiana University East. And I got hired, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that story when it comes to talking about negotiation. But I found out through the grapevine that there were 220 applicants for that job. Okay, so there were 220 applicants. They ended up inviting 3 people to campus, and then I got the job. For the job that I currently hold, which is my position here at Roger Williams University, there were 183 candidates or applications for that job. Okay, so it is very, very normal for there to be upwards of 150 to potentially, if it's like a research one job, like, the real cushy job that, requires you to come in 1 day a week and, just basically write music and be the composer or whatever the case may be, usually the upper echelon jobs, those will people will apply for those in droves. Even if they're not qualified, they'll just apply. And so there'll be 300 or plus applications for a position like that. For a position at a regional campus or a small liberal arts college that might be somewhere that's maybe less than desirable to live, depending on, there are a lot of other factors that go into whether you should apply for a job, and one of them might be geography. Um, Even so, you're still going to get, or the committee will still get about 150, 200 applications. That's very common. Okay. So HR, so human resources, that's that abbreviation, and DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are important things. HR and usually the chief diversity officer. There's different titles for that go around different campuses. Will always tell the search committee, uh, you know, the do's and don'ts of working with a diverse candidate pool or trying to collect a diverse candidate pool. And that's a big thing now. It's been a big thing actually since I've been in academia, but it's even more of a big thing now than ever before. So um, if you are a candidate that falls into the category of diverse, i.e., not white, not male, um, it doesn't mean that you're going to get preferential treatment, but there is going to be the effort on the part of the committee to make sure that candidates who are underrepresented do get, let's say, definitely get a seat at the table. Okay, so if you're white and male, that doesn't mean don't apply for jobs. Okay, because most of the applications are from white males. So you're going to get there'll be a lot of competition essentially. So but committees are very mindful of diversity and very mindful of trying to create diversity on campuses, and that's a big thing. So um, read the job description about their diversity statement if you are concerned about it, if you are from an underrepresented group, you would like to know what that campus's position is on diversity and equity and inclusion. There's usually a website or some page that talks about that, so you can read that and see how serious that institution is about their commitment to DEI. I already talked about the number of applications. And then the last thing is the first cut is often brutal. So, um, what does that mean? Well, just like what I said, if you didn't follow directions, that's one less from 180, that becomes 179 applications to sift through. If you don't have something spelled correctly, if your first sentence has a typo in it of your cover letter, trust me, believe it or not, that might sound very petty, but when a search committee of academics who are also teaching and have their classes and students and all this other kind of stuff, in other words, they're very busy too, and they're trying to get this job done, and you've got five people on the search committee, maybe six people on the search committee, and you divide that up, that's a lot of applications to sift through. The process of first cut is often very brutal and very it's not with a chisel, it's not with a X-Acto knife, it is with a sledgehammer. And you could be the best candidate for that job, and there's just something about your materials. Maybe your reference letter came in late. That's another one. Hey, if candidate A has all the reference letters and candidate B doesn't have the reference letters, candidate B doesn't probably goes to the discard pile. So it's really, really, really important to make sure that your materials are put together well, organized well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. and that if you have people writing letters for you, that you ask them well enough in advance so that you're not saying, hey, don't email your referee and say, oh, by the way, the job, the deadline is Thursday and it's Monday, and you haven't even really talked to that person about whether or not they write a letter for you or whatever the case, even if it's somebody you know well. So give your referees a lot of time and a lot of heads up, and be very nice, and make sure that you do due diligence so that those letters do get into the committee on time. Okay, because you don't want to get axed even before you have gotten considered. Okay. Um, so you've made it to round two. Congratulations. Now, what is round two? Well, round two is where the committee has done the big hatchet job to the big pile and has gotten that pile down to anywhere between 20 to maybe 30, 35, maybe sometimes 40. It just depends on the number of people on the search committee and how much time they've allotted to the process of doing follow-ups, right? So sometimes that follow-up process is to ask for materials. So if you haven't been asked for materials, sometimes the next stage is to ask for materials. And so there might be, I'll say, before they get to the phone and video interviews, a review of materials. So there might be, say, maybe 40 candidates that have made it past round one, that they will say, okay, let's ask for scores or examples, et cetera, et cetera. And then after they review that material, they might cut it down even further to maybe 20 or 25 that they will then go forward and do the phone and video interviews with. Now, a very important point. If you get asked for materials and you get asked to send 2 scores, don't send 3. Don't send 2 and then say, by the way, this piece is also really good. Like don't do that. Follow instructions. And I'm going to keep, that's a mantra here. Follow the instructions, because the way for them to go, oh, this person is now no longer on the list, is for you to not follow the instructions. Is to send 3 scores when they ask for 2, or send 1 score when they ask for 2. Because you might say, oh, I only have a good recording of this one. No, if they ask for 2 scores, send 2 scores. If they ask for 2 articles or 3 articles, send the 2 or the 3 articles. Okay? Because following instructions is actually part of your job interview, right? Can you follow instructions? Can you do what the chair tells you to do? Can you make that 9 o'clock meeting? That's actually part of the process. Can you follow the process? Can you follow the instructions? So, so then we get to the phone and video interview part. Now, when I first started, it was all phone interviews. And I've had both phone interviews and, well, there was Skype and then Zoom, etc. Phone interviews are interesting because you get no feedback, no visual feedback from the committee. So that can be very disheartening. We can talk about that process if you want. Anybody's curious about that. And some things that I do to kind of calm my nerves, because sometimes you can answer a question and then you hear nothing. There's just silence on the end of the phone. And part of that is because they don't know if you're finished yet. So you shouldn't just assume that they're not interested in what you have to say. But that's another thing. Now with video, you can get some sense of body language, but sometimes you'll get blank stares. And an interesting thing about that is that sometimes the committee, they have a lot to do, and so they're just interested in getting the facts. And you answer the question, and they're not there to give you a whole lot of visual feedback. Like they're not there to nod their head or smile or whatever, because they don't want to, part of that is they don't want to bias your responses. And they don't want to bias responses from candidate to candidate. So what they tend to do is be very stone-faced. And they tend to just, they might, acknowledge and be pleasant and all that kind of stuff, but they're not there to like go, oh yeah, that was a really great answer. Or, kind of go back like, what? Like whatever they might think, they're going to show a poker face. Okay. That's usually the way it works at least in my experience, and that's usually what we're told to do. What can a committee ask you? Well, at the phone and video interview stage, a committee can ask you, they'll ask you very specific questions about, well, what do you think you can bring to the program? Or, we noticed that you have experience doing this. How do you think that experience doing this can apply to our program? So what does that mean? Well, that means the third thing, by the way, they won't ask you personal questions, and they're not allowed to. Even when we get to the next slide about the in-person interviews, they're not allowed to ask you, oh, are you married? That's not, HR will tell you that that's a violation of all sorts of things. Okay, so they can't ask you about your personal life. However, you can, if a candidate opens that door and says, oh, well, my fiance is really likes that area or something like that. When the door is opened, then the committee can respond and respond humanly to that. But they're not to if you ever get asked a personal question, especially in the phone interview phase, be a little suspicious of that. But anyway, do your homework on the department, school, and program. I mean, this may seem like Captain Obvious, but um, I have in my earlier days gone into phone interviews and not had time to look at the web page. And I'm there really not knowing what this thing is about. And boy, that's an awkward thing when they ask you about their program. They want you to respond to how your strengths fit to their program, and you're scrambling trying to figure that out, while you're on the phone with them, and you've got 15 minutes. And typically a phone interview will typically be 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20. It just depends on how many people they have to get through in the day, right? And they usually try to get all their phone interviews done within approximately 1 week's time so that they can then schedule follow-ups, or they can talk, they can meet, talk about it, figure out who they're going to invite to campus. So do your homework. Yeah, be clear and direct in answering, because if your phone interview is scheduled, say, between 10 and 10:15, first of all, don't be late. That's obvious. Don't miss the phone call. Don't not be ready to answer the Zoom call or whatever the case may be. Be ready. The second thing is that be mindful that when they say 10:15 and you're busy, blah, 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 and it's now 10:17 and now you've just wasted 2 of their minutes, unless they have asked you a question and they have said, oh, we'd like to ask you this question. I know we're running out of time, but we'd like you to address this. If they invite you to talk more and they invite you past that time, then that's okay. But don't ramble. Be direct, be clear, get to the point, and show that you did the research on their program, but don't overdo it. Don't start flattering the committee like, oh yeah, hey, Professor so-and-so, I really like your thing on this, right? Try to avoid that, at least at this stage, right? This is not the time for that. The in-person interview is maybe more the time for that sort of thing. So, yeah, and that brings us to, yeah, you made it to the finals, right? This is like if you follow college basketball or, brackets, right? You've gone from the Sweet 16 and now you're in the Final Four, basically, right? So, yeah, this is a huge thing, and I could talk about this for I could make a whole YouTube or webinar just on what it's like to be in the finals and what the process is like. You'll often meet with everybody in the search committee. You will often meet with either the chair or the dean or the director of the department or school of music, however the organization of that campus is. And you'll usually meet with an upper level administrator. That could be a provost, an associate provost. It could be a dean at that level, or it could even be a vice chancellor or something. It just depends on the organizational chart for that campus. And I mentioned this before about what they can ask and what they can't ask. So even when they have you at dinner, okay, it's usually a very common thing is you'll have meals with the committee or members of the committee and maybe some other guests that come in, some other members of faculty, maybe sometimes students. They can't legally ask you about your personal life, about your orientation. I mean, all that stuff is off limits unless you bring it up. And if you bring it up, then that door is open, and then that can be talked about. So it's all up to how much information you're willing to divulge. Now, this is a tricky thing, and there's no hard science on this. The tricky thing is how to act like a human being and be personable and be nice. Because here's the thing: at this stage, when they invite you to campus, they have made a fairly significant investment because they're going to fly you out, they're going to put you up in a hotel, they're going to feed you, they're going to spend basically at least one full, if not two, depends on the school, days with you. Um, it's intensive, right? It's an investment on their in time and money on their part, and they only get to invite three, maybe if they're lucky, four people to campus to do this, and they need to make this decision. It's important for them to move things forward. So they have to, within the span of 1, 2 days, get to know who you are as a person and whether or not they feel that you can work with them as a colleague. And that is really one of the most important parts of this process is how can they see you in their department as a colleague, as a professional colleague to work with on a daily basis, to have coffee with, to complain about, administration with, or whatever the case may be, or to maybe be on a committee on a committee together, whatever the case may be. So because no search committee and no department wants to hire somebody unless it's a 1 year. That's a different story, by the way. I'm talking about full-time positions that are either long-term lecturer or tenure track. They want to hire somebody that they think is going to be there for, theoretically the rest of their career. So they're not thinking, oh, we're just going to deal with this person for 1 year. That's a waste of time and a waste of money. So um, so they have to make that determination very quick. So you have to show your best stuff. You have to be on. You have to, but you don't want to be fake, right? And so you want to tell them personal stuff, but you obviously don't want to tell them stuff that don't feel comfortable with them knowing. So it's entirely up to you for how much you choose to share and how you choose to share it. Um, you know, I have down on the bottom one for considerations, the bottom and the middle for considerations. Do you order the wine? And that was sort of a when I first did this, my advisor, we would have discussions about, well, should you order the wine, right? Like if you are there at dinner and you're at a nice restaurant, and usually they'll take you to nice restaurants, and they're going to take you to Wendy's or something. And if the committee orders wine, like if somebody in the committee says, "Oh, let's have a bottle of wine" or whatever, absolutely, right? I mean, if you're not alcohol, if you're um, abstinent in terms of alcohol, that's a different story. But I mean, that I'm using that as an analogy for how comfortable should you get with a committee in this intensive process. Um, and that's where you can say, by the way, that's where you can say, oh, Professor so and so, at this point, probably first name basis. So, um, hey, Jill, I really liked your piece. That I heard that was really great. Or, hey, so and so, he was a friend of mine at my undergrad, or whatever the case may be. You can make those personal connections, and that's when you can do that, and you should do that because you should show that you are interested in them as people and that you know something about them, uh, and their careers and their interests, and that how you can fit into that, and how you can connect. That's an important part of this process. Um, what should you ask? You should ask about things like program trends, student numbers, recruitment, what that's about, yeah, the health of the program, finances, what kind of material support does the administration provide to the program, um, things like tenure. If you're in a tenure track position, a tenure track job search, like what counts for teaching, what counts for research, what counts for service, and the P&T, that means promotion and tenure process. Those are all totally valid things to ask about so that you can take notes about. Okay. okay? Because every school is different. Some interviews will actually schedule a meeting with maybe the promotion and tenure committee of that particular school. I actually had a couple of job interviews where um, I actually had like a breakfast meeting with the P&T committee, and they literally told me their process. They said, as long as you do this, this, and this, and this, you should be fine. So sometimes it depends on the job search, but sometimes the part of the process of an in-person interview will include that. But if it doesn't include that, you really should ask, because that's important, because if you're going to decide, assuming you get the job, to go, you want to know what you're in for. You want to know what's going to count as teaching, or what's going to count as research or creative work, or what's going to count as service. And by the way, those three things, teaching, research, and service, those are like the trifecta of the academic job, because essentially that's what your job is based on. You're going to teach, obviously. You're going to do your research work or your creative work, which is equivalent. And we can also talk about when you're working at a school that doesn't know anything about music composition, you have to sort of tell them what's equivalent in terms of research, because they don't, someone who's a biologist won't know what a string quartet means as opposed to, say, a conference presentation, right? They need that connection. That's a direct thing if anybody wants to know about that. I went through that whole process when I did P&T. So, uh, yes, and then the last thing is service. And what service is essentially doing things like this, like being on the other end, like being on a search committee, or being on faculty senate, or all those kinds of things. Those are the three things, and different programs have different weights assigned to how much they expect from those three things. If you're at a smaller school, you're going to have more teaching and less research. In other words, they're going to put more emphasis on your teaching and less on your research when it comes to promotion and evaluation. Service is usually always about a third or so of any, doesn't matter where you're at. So it's a sliding scale. Last point, and they've been staring you in the face now for the last 10 minutes I've been rambling. Don't talk about money unless you get asked about money up front. And what happens if you get asked a question, because sometimes this will be asked. If you get asked the question, so what are your salary requirements? You shouldn't say what those are. You should say, well, I mean, I'm open to various things. Like, try to answer it as generically as possible. Because if you say something, that can be used for or against you. Generally speaking, you won't get into the subject of money. I had one dean of one school. This was a Research One school, actually, and this was during the economic downturn. So this is about 10 years ago, and I was doing an interview, and one dean basically just said, $45,000. That's it. Like there's no negotiation. Like he literally just said, that's what you're going to get hired at. There's no negotiation. There's don't even ask. That's rare, but it can happen, especially if it's a smaller program or whatever the case may be. They might literally just tell you, this is what we're going to hire you for, or this is what we have to offer you. So now, how do you get the offer? Like, what happens next? Well, after they've met with their candidates, then you wait, and they deliberate, and then they choose. Now, sometimes they can fail the search. A failed search means that the committee or can't come up with a decision, or the committee puts forth a candidate they like, and the dean or the provost or something shoots that down, and they don't want to go to they don't have a plan B. They don't like anybody else. They don't want anybody else from that group. So that can what's called a failed search. That happens. Doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. But when you get the phone call, usually it's a phone call not from the committee, by the way. At this point, the committee is off the hook. When you get the phone call from the dean or the director, whatever the case may be, that you got the job, usually you got it because it comes down to fit. If you didn't get the job, it means that they felt you didn't fit. That doesn't mean you're not good. So I've been rejected more times than I've been accepted. I've been lucky, but I've also been I've been shot down by a whole bunch of really good people and even people that I know. I mean I've I mean not I've had people who have been friends of mine on search committees and I've not gotten the job. By the way, having a friend on the search committee doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the job. And they have to call me and they basically say, oh, Elliot, I'm really sorry, and I say, man, it's okay because I understand because it's about fit, right? Um, and we can talk about the post if you didn't get the job, if you know somebody on the committee, if you're a friend of somebody on the committee, even maybe even if you don't, it's not unusual for and out of ordinary for you to maybe ask gently about not why you got turned down, but perhaps ask for some feedback. Okay. And that's a tricky process because you don't want to make it sound like, oh, tell me why I was wrong. You don't want that. But it might be helpful for you to get feedback. And especially if you know somebody on the committee that you can get feedback about your performance. Because there's usually something in what you did or said. And it's not just like, you told an off color joke and everybody got offended. That's not the thing. But it could be like maybe some certain things that you were doing that maybe another candidate did better. And doesn't necessarily mean that you're better, that the other candidate is better than you. It just means that maybe they felt the other candidate was a better fit. Okay, so it's a it's like relationships. It's not you, it's me. That sort of thing. So the job search, you got an offer. Okay, so congratulations, clap, 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 because it's a tough process to get to this point. You've probably fought your way through 150 to 300 candidates to get to this point. Okay, so there's a whole lot of things on this slide. There's a whole lot of do's and don'ts. And so and there's a lot of confusion about this. And even my doctoral advisor, as much as he was trying to be helpful, was not helpful in this particular regard, in some aspects. Um, like for example, if you get the job offer, what is the window of time? In other words, like what happens? Like how long do you have to say yes? Well, um, once you get offered a job, like once you get called and you're offered the job, okay, there is an unwritten rule that there's a clock that goes into place. It's roughly about 2 weeks. Okay. So 2 weeks from that phone call is about when you have to really give a yes or no. That doesn't mean drag your feet. Usually in those 2 weeks, you're in process of negotiating your contract. So you're going to use all of that time very wisely, right? You don't want to string these people on if you're not interested in the job. So the first thing you got to do is ask yourself if you're interested. So we didn't really talk about that, but sometimes you can come away from a job interview where they think you're great and you think, nah, I don't really want to do this. And I've actually had that. I've actually turned down jobs, but I've turned down jobs because either I had one already or I had another offer that I preferred, and I didn't want to play favorites. I didn't want to play one against the other in terms of trying to get more money or whatever the case may be. So I usually be genuine, but don't string these people along because they're going to probably need to get to their second person or do something if you turn them down. Like if you say thank you, but no thank you. So ask yourself if you really want the job. Okay. And if you really want the job, then you're going to get into the nuts and bolts of negotiating your contract. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say thank you. You're not going to say yes, I want the job. You're going to say thank you very much. Even if you love the job, even if it's your dream job, don't say yes on the phone when you first get that call because you have all right at that point you've got most power to negotiate. Once you say yes, you have no more power to negotiate. So you could say, thank you, this is great, I'm really excited, this was, I loved the school, blah, blah, blah. Send me this in writing. So you want to get this as an email. Nowadays, it's all email. So you want to get what their initial offer is in writing first. It says, you tell the dean or whatever, can you please just send me that in an email? They'll do it. That's what they're supposed to do, right? They'll send you the email. They'll say, we want to offer you this much money. You know, we want you, these are the start dates, the end dates, whatever the case may be, whatever's in that initial offer. So then, you hopefully you've clarified your expectations in terms of teaching, research, and service, and what makes load. So what load is essentially what counts as full time, because when you teach at this level, you're not teaching 40 hours a week. What you're doing is you're teaching a load. You're basically, you just need to get the job done. Whether you get it done in 2 hours, you get it done in 40 hours, load counts as X number of things per semester to qualify for full-time employment. So usually that's at typical schools, it's like 3 classes in the spring and 3 classes in the fall, or maybe 4, 3. And at my college, it's a little heavy on teaching. My college is 4, 3, and I can choose which is 4 and which is 3. In other words, the normal load for making load is 4 classes in one semester and 3 classes in the next semester, okay? But a lot of schools are 3, 3. Some are 3, 2. And if you're at a Research 1 institution, i.e. like a University of Michigan or something like this, it can be 2, 2, or sometimes even 2, 1 if you have some other responsibilities that are part of your contract. So that's all plus minus depending on the specifics of the job. Now, do you ask for more money? I got not into an argument, but I basically disagreed with my doctoral advisor about this. The doctoral advisor told me, never ask for more money. Just take what they have to give you. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because that money is too low. So when I got my first job, when I got the call from my dean, who would then become my boss, my dean calls and I said, thank you very much. This is really great. I got the email and then I called him back and I said, hey, the offer is great, but I'm thinking this number is a little low. And I'll tell you what the number was. This is at IU East. They offered me $43,000 to start. And, you know, I looked at the economics. You know, it's not an expensive place to live, but hey, I can get some more money, right? So I said, I'm thinking closer to 50. Okay, I just overshot. I never thought I would, you know, you overshoot. You always overshoot your what you expect or what you want to get. And he came back, actually, surprisingly enough, came back the next day. He said, oh, I have to talk to, you know, the provost, whatever. He came back the next day and he says, okay, we can offer you 48. So right there, I got a $5,000 increase just by asking. Now, why is it important to do this at this stage? Because this sets the baseline for all of your increases in the future. This is your starting plateau. If you just think about it, over the course of 20 years, if you have an average, you know, 1.5 or 2% raise, which never really happens in the real life, but if you have that and you're starting at 43 versus 48, it's not just the $5,000 for that first year. It's that $5,000 compounded over 20 years in terms of percentages. So by the time you get to the end, I am not going to do the math, but if you want to do the math, just do the math. You're going to figure out how much you're going to get paid in your last year of employment versus how much you got, you know, that's a huge difference. It also translates into your retirement benefits, because oftentimes, unfortunately, the days of guaranteed pensions are over. So most programs have what's called a defined contribution, and they're going to put depending on the school. At my school, they put they match a percentage of my income. So I put in 3% from my paycheck and they match it with 6%. Okay. So, and it varies. That's actually gone down. It was 10% actually whenever I started. So the administration has slowly been chewing away at that. But nonetheless, that's a percentage that's based on your base salary. So the higher your base salary, the more money goes into your retirement, which of course then compounds over years. So this is the time to ask for money. This is the time to talk about money. It's the time to be serious about money. And every single time, even with temporary jobs, even with 1-year visiting position jobs, every time I've asked for money, I've gotten more. Okay. At Washington and Lee University, I was a visiting, so I wasn't getting paid like the full tenure people. It was quite a bit less actually, but nonetheless, it was still pretty good. They offered me 52. I asked for 56. I got 54. Um, at University of Tennessee, um, and trust me, this is all public data, by the way, so I'm not spilling the beans where I shouldn't. At University of Tennessee, the school director calls me and says, "Oh, here's we can give you 35," and I just said, "No." Like, sorry, like I'm not a student anymore. Like I'm like over 40 now. Like I don't want to be working for that kind of pay. Even though this is Knoxville, Tennessee, and it's much cheaper cost of living, and there's no state income tax, so I did calculate that in. I said, man, you've got to, it's got to be closer to 45 or 50. And he eventually came back and gave me 40, and I took it because I needed a job. So then here, I was offered 61. I asked for 70, and I got 64. Now, at what point do you stop negotiating that? You basically can go through maybe one or two iterations of this before you probably should stop, because at some point you're going to get the resistance. So your first request for more money will probably be met with a counter offer. And then if you think the counter offer is still a little low, you can ask maybe one more time, says, "Can you maybe do it like maybe add an extra 1,000 or something like this?" You might be able to get there. If not, you should probably stop. Okay, so maybe two cycles through that negotiation is fine. Then, um, but there are other value added things. So you should definitely ask, and you should really receive your moving and relocation expenses. That also includes, and especially if they're not moving too much on salary, you should absolutely try to hit these other things up as much as you can, like a relocation reimbursement. So in other words, like if you have to travel to that place to go find an apartment or house or whatever the case may be, you should get reimbursed at least in some, right? And I've usually been successful at getting money for that, even if that was not originally part of what they would offer in a job. And the moving expenses, usually you get those full. Sometimes they give you a budget, like they'll say you can spend up to 2,500 bucks, but you have to use our moving company, whatever the case may be. But you should absolutely make sure you have that. If you don't have that, you really should put it in there. Because they shouldn't ask you to move across country and have you shoulder what would end up probably being 3, 4, 5,000 bucks off your own off your out of your own bank account. So that's not fair. Um, Tech. This is where you're going to ask for your computer. This is where you're going to try to ask for, I want a new Mac. I want the new M1 Mac, or I want this, or I want that. Just don't just say you want it. Say you need it. I need a Mac because I'm a musician and I'm going to be running Pro Tools, or I'm going to be running Logic, or I'm going to be doing this, or whatever the case may be. Make a justification, because a lot of schools will just give you a trashy Dell Windows desktop, and that'll be like their standard package for faculty members. So like if you're in the business department, maybe it doesn't really matter that you have that fancy Mac and a big monitor. But if you're doing something like in music or creative work, whatever the case may be, you might need to have all that extra stuff. And so you make a case for that extra equipment if you don't already have that allotted to you. There's also research bonus. Like some schools will actually give you basically free spending money. It's you can kind of spend it uh, on anything you want. That could be for like travel to a conference, whatever the case may be. But it'll be a bonus. It'll be in addition to whatever is normally allotted to faculty from year to year, and that can be like an incentive, think of it like a signing bonus. So you should ask about that, even if it's not included. Uh, Make sure you get all your office equipment you need loaded up front. In other words, if you were shown your office of like where your office would be when you had your interview, if the piano was in bad shape, or there was no piano in there and you need a piano, you gotta ask for one. You gotta say, hey, I really need a piano. I can't be teaching music theory and ear training to students in my office when I don't have a piano. The very least, have them get you a very good electronic piano, or whatever the case may be. That also includes things like, if the chairs are old or whatever, like ask for stuff. Like say, you know, could I have a new desk, or could I have an office light, or whatever your needs are, you should try to put some kind of rider in your contract that says that you have a certain budget for office equipment if it's not included, or they haven't preempted this by saying, hey, we're an all Steinway school, and by fall there's gonna be a new Steinway Grand in your office. Um, and again, clarity on load and expectations. Um, this is important. If your school is unionized, you can be pretty safe in understanding that those load and expectations are going to be baked into everybody. So you probably don't need to ask too much about that. But uh, if it's a, if you are your own bargaining unit, right? If you're an independent bargaining unit, you need to make sure that your load and your expectations are spelled out in the contract. In other words, what makes load? Okay. Get everything in writing. So get everything, even if it's you've hammered everything out, get that email from the dean or from your director, whatever the case may be, get it all in writing, look over it, and then get that contract. Okay. Oh, and yeah, last point. Don't haggle with the search committee. Don't reach out to the search. If you're in negotiations with the dean or the director, don't reach out to the search committee and say, "Hey, I'm asking for more money. Can you help me?" They're out of it. They don't. Their job is done. They're probably at the towards the end of the semester. They've got a lot of stuff going on. They've handed this off, and they know that you're the candidate that's being asked for the job. They assume everything's going to take place upstairs. So don't bother the search committee about that. That's kind of not good etiquette. Um, all right. Well, you're accepted. Now what? Um, you accepted the job. Uh, so again, when you arrive, again, if you haven't already seeked clarity on what counts for scholarship and service and teaching, do that. Make sure that someone explains to you the P&T process clearly, especially now that you have to start counting that. Follow this clearly. Usually, a lot of programs will give you a faculty mentor. They'll say, "Oh, we're going to assign you somebody from the department to kind of be, who's in a maybe already tenured, who will help you through the process." That can be very helpful. If there isn't that, ask your chair. Would it be possible for me to have an advisor or somebody I can talk to about this process? Um, this is a little bit further down the road, but when you're in your first years, and so this is now for the tenure track folks, when you do your annual reports, and that's a thing, you do an annual report every year up until you get tenure. Read very carefully the criticisms, suggestions, and whatever they think is good from your chair or your dean, whatever, whoever's writing that report. Very carefully. Don't ignore it, because everything that they write in there is what they want you to do or address in the next year. Okay? So you need to show that you understand that, and you also need to show that you're making some effort in that direction. So if they feel that you're not doing enough research, or they feel that your teaching is lacking because of this or that, address that. The easiest way to not get tenure is to show that you're not at least working towards the concerns of your supervisors. It's the easiest way for them to say after 6 years, "Thank you, but no thank you." Also, remember this: your tenure clock doesn't begin the day you sign your contract or the day your job officially starts. It begins the day you got your PhD or your DMA. So when you're working on your materials, and especially when you work on your review materials, like your final materials for promotion and tenure, you should include everything you did prior to getting this job. If you have time that you've done, include uh, things that you've done, conferences you've done, whatever the case may be, especially in scholarship, but also in teaching. If you had 4 or 5 years of doing lecturing or adjuncting, whatever the case may be, include that. Include things that you feel are relevant to your case. Um, they're not going to be the things that are going to be heavily weighted, but yet it's going to show that you have a lot of experience. Um, because we were doing things by paper, all the way up until last year because of COVID, I had 3 binders this thick that I submitted for my promotion and tenure. Now, admittedly, one and a half of those, or two, almost two of those, was basically music. I printed 8.5 by 11 copies back to back of all the music I've written since 2007 when I got my PhD, because that's what I did. That's what I've been doing as a doctor technically. So it looked impressive, and it was because I wanted that committee to see that I did a lot of work. I didn't want them to say, oh, he didn't really write very much last year. Well, maybe I didn't. Maybe I was busy. So include everything. And tenure, again, we can talk about that process. Maybe that's not interesting for some of you, about like what the tenure process really is and what it's like to be on that, in that year or that year and a half of doing that. Um, but generally speaking, I'm just going to say, if you followed your instructions, if you followed, and those of you who are on the Zoom call will see my mouse. But if you follow that, you understand and you've addressed your annual reports in your next level reflections, and if they have acknowledged that and said, oh yeah, you've done, you've improved on this or that, chances are that if the school level committee likes you, and your chair likes you, and your dean likes you, in other words, they think you're doing a good job, chances are you're going to be okay. Because at that point, it just goes up to a higher level committee that probably doesn't know anything about music or doesn't know anything about you, and they're just going to look and see, oh, he's passed or she's passed all of those other things, and okay, great, this looks like it works for us. And then they'll just kick it upstairs, and by the time it gets to the president or the board of trustees, it's pro forma at that point, unless you've pissed somebody off, but that's another story. I never did, by the way. I'm just saying I've heard stories about this. So, okay, I know this was long, but it's a lot. It's a big subject, and there's a lot, and there's even stuff that I didn't really talk about. But I think it's time for Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that slide up, and I'm going to hop over to the YouTube and Facebook stuff, and also just to see if anybody's got comments or questions over there. We have a couple of comments, but well, how about folks in the room, as it were? Questions, thoughts, comments, anything you would like me to continue on or build upon? Yes, Ian. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So folks, I don't know if anybody, if you heard Ian's question. If you didn't hear Ian's question, I can paraphrase it. So I'm just curious because I don't know if the audio stream from the Zoom is going out to the house. Yes, it is. Okay. But I'll paraphrase anyways, just to see if I understand the question. It's about geography, right? That should you focus on a specific area, or should you go outside of that geography when searching for a job? And this is an interesting question. It's a personal one. It can be a tough one to answer, and the reason why is because everyone's situations are different. And some people have families. Typically, a lot of grad students, by the time they get a doctorate, they're in their 30s. Maybe they're married, or they have a significant other partner. Maybe they have a small child or children, because they started a family. And so then it becomes like issues of where the family wants to be and whether or not their partner wants a job, or can get a job in the new location, whatever the case may be. So, or you just really love a particular area. Like, I mean, Boston area, I love Boston. love to get a job up here. Anybody looking for a composer in the Boston area? I mean, I love Roger Williams. It's Rhode Island. It's beautiful, but I would also like to be up here too. So let me know. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm being funny. But your question's a good one. If you're not bound by family or a partner, or for some reason just absolutely, or maybe you've got elderly parents you need to take care of, whatever the case may be, um, then you would do best, considering the fact that there are fewer jobs than there are far fewer jobs than there are applicants. You would do best to telescope your search nationally and maybe even internationally. I've applied for jobs. I actually got a phone interview for a job over in Thailand years ago. And, back then I was, single and just like, yeah, I'm sure. What the hell? I can go live in Thailand. Like, well, that might be fun. I like Thai food. So, I mean, you should apply. So the word of advice I would have is apply for every single job you think you are qualified to hold. And unless you're not qualified, like if it's in an area that is maybe you don't feel like you may want to live in, like if you're not interested in living in a particular part of the country, and maybe the job is, you could do it, but it doesn't sort of hit all of your interests or whatever, you can kind of weigh that a bit. Um, but you know what? Having a job can lead to better jobs in places you want to be. So here's a good case study is me. Okay. So when I started this crazy path to get a doctorate, like I had gotten my master's degree and I took like 10 years off basically doing professional music stuff, composer, and I ran a business and I was a record producer and I did a million things. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get my PhD because, I didn't and I was going to, and I just felt like it was something I needed to finish. And then I thought, I like teaching, I've had good experience with teaching, etc. So I'm going to do that. Um, I never thought really about where I would end up. I'm from Boston. I'm a New England guy, and I'm, fairly liberal minded. I never thought about living in other parts of the country. I wasn't like totally against it, but I never thought about it. Um, but what I never thought in my wildest dreams is where I'd end up living. And I ended up spending my first 7 years or so, 6 years, living in parts of the country that I just would not have thrown a dart at. I would have had to throw a dart at randomly to figure out. Like I lived in Indiana. I never thought I'd ever live in Indiana, but I lived in Indiana. I lived in Virginia. Never thought I'd live there, but I lived there, and I lived in Tennessee. And that's a culture shock. You're from the Northeast, and when you move to Tennessee, and you go to the local Starbucks that becomes your office, as usually Starbucks, whatever Starbucks is near me, becomes my office. Um, I was asked, like once people were very friendly, and after they found out that I just moved to the area, the second question they asked me was, "So, have you found a church yet?" Because that's what you're supposed to do in Tennessee, is you're supposed to find your church. Like, who's your minister? Where's your church? You would never get asked that here. In Boston, if somebody asks you where your church is, you'd basically tell them to go, you know, screw you. I don't have to tell you anything. But there you can't do that. You have to be very friendly and say, "Oh, I don't have one." Like, it doesn't matter. I'm an atheist. I'll have to tell you about the funny story about the time I befriended a minister who was very nice. He also it was a teacher at a Baptist college just down the road from, this was in Tennessee, and he and I had like this 4 hour conversation, and he was trying to basically bring me to Jesus, and I was basically telling him that, nah, you're wasting your time, Mark. But he was very nice, you know. Um, but your mileage may vary. Maybe you want that. That's fine. For me, I would never have. That's not where I would have picked to be. That being said, I loved my time in Tennessee, despite the fact that the pay was horrible. I met some great people there who are still my friends, and in fact, I collaborate with now. Like, I've written pieces for some of my friends. And so like, and I love the school. I mean, there are a lot of things I loved, and some students, some former students of mine from Tennessee have become friends of mine. So like, you just never know what's going to happen when you don't know what doors can open up down the road. I guess that's the what I'm what I can mostly offer is that, even a place that you might not think about might be an interesting place to be. Maybe you'll love it. Maybe you'll fall in love with the cornfields of Indiana. I didn't, but I also have some lifelong friends from Indiana now. So, and I also know how that part of the country thinks. So whenever there's a big when there's a political divide like we have, I actually can understand, even if I don't agree with it, I can understand how that part of the country thinks. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying I can understand it, right? I have a better understanding than somebody who didn't live outside of, say, a big city. So, so there's that. Does that, Ian, does that help? Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah, and that's all a matter of like, is a program looking for, so if in case you didn't hear it, Ian was basically saying like there's, you can't, you can't practically turn around besides in Boston without seeing a school or a Dunkin' Donuts. And so I think the university to Dunkin' Donuts ratio is approximately 1 to 1. So so you'd figure your odds are good, right? But here's the thing. How many of those schools are looking for full-time tenure eligible stuff? I mean, that doesn't just because there's a lot of schools doesn't mean that there are a lot of jobs. And that's the other issue, right? Is where are the jobs? You got to go where the jobs are. Now, maybe you'll get lucky and there'll be a couple openings at Boston area schools that will fit your profile and fit your interests and fit your skill set. And that'll obviously those will be the top on the top of your list, right? But you can't just write a letter to a like I can't just write a letter to New England Conservatory of Music, which is my alma mater and where my dad taught for 25 years. I can't just call up Mike Gandolfi and say, Mike, I want a job. That's, that's just not going to happen. There's no job there. Oh, they are? Oh, I should apply. I should look at I haven't even looked at the job calls for this. I mean, I've sort of scanned a little bit, but anyway, that's another story. You should apply. So, um, oh, theory. Okay, well, I'm not. Yeah, if it was composition, I would be much more excited. It's probably maybe. I wonder who's it for. Is it maybe for Larry Davidson, who's retiring? I don't know, because Larry got it. So it's probably I mean, Larry. Not let Lyle Davidson, Larry Scripp, and Lyle Davidson. Okay, all right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. I was thinking about Larry Scripp at the same time that I was thinking about Lyle Davidson, but that's it. Okay, other questions? I'm gonna give preference to my Zoom panel because they're the ones that showed up here, but I can also grab something off of or comments off of the internet as well because I'm actually monitoring that as well. Um, got a couple people saying this is great, but they'll watch it later because they got to get back to work. Uh, Josh. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I should really pay attention to the chat. I'm. That's fine. No, 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 no. And I apologize. Thank you for because the chat window is hidden behind another window, and that's why I didn't see it. So, well, the problem I got like 15. Yeah, I got 15. I got Facebook window up. I've got a, other, whatever. You know how that is sometimes. So, okay. Emily asks, and I'm going to read your question out. Can you speak more to what you think committees respond well or poorly to in looking at your career as a composer. For instance, festivals slash conferences slash performances, entrepreneurship, outreach, experience with electronics, being a composer performer, et cetera, et cetera. Very good question. Um, well, uh, that's a that really comes down to fit. It really comes down to what is that school looking for. What that program is looking for is going to be basically what that program is about and what they need or what they feel they want to grow into. So, um, uh, so that's kind of a twofold thing. So there are programs that are looking, say, they might be looking specifically for a person who can do electroacoustic music because they're either trying to replace somebody who does that, or they want to build that presence on their in their program, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so obviously, then um, your experience in electroacoustic music will play a part. So if you they ask you for materials as a composer, if you only send them string quartets, that's probably not a good. They won't respond well to that. Right? That seems pretty obvious there. But um, if it's a job that's a bit more open-ended, like let's say just a generic composition job, okay, which is maybe a catch-all, maybe a smaller program. Well, actually, smaller programs might not even ask for your music. So because they're not in, they don't, they're maybe they're not looking for a composer, but they're looking for someone to teach music theory. So they don't care whether you're a theorist. They don't care what you are as long as you can do the teaching. So there's that. But if they ask you for materials, then what they're looking for is um, they're looking for competence. I don't want to say over substance, but they're looking for, like, if it's a job that focuses on acoustic composition or orchestration, then they're going to probably look at your music from that point of view and not from electronics. So if you go ahead and send them a piece for flute and max MSP, that's probably, I mean, you could send it as one of your pieces if they asked for multiple pieces just to show that you've got breadth. But that's probably not where they're going to be focusing on. So a lot of it's going to be what they're looking for. Now, you do mention other things like professional experience. So beyond the pieces themselves, your professional experience, entrepreneurship, outreach, et cetera, everything. So if you're a composer who's written a lot of really cool music and you've never had any performances, and you send them all MIDI files that you've produced at home, no matter how good they are, because you might own Vienna Symphonic Instruments and you've taken 15 hours to, like, make that string swell work. Great. But that's not going to show that you have a lot of experience. It's going to show that you might be a decent composer, but not necessarily an experienced composer. And they might then, if that's up against, let's say, a composer that might not have the best recordings, like maybe it's like, you know, a cell phone in the back of the hall. But let's say maybe it's a school, or maybe it's a like a professional group that's playing it as opposed to a school group, or that you've gone to like a handful of European programs, festivals that are been curated, so that you've maybe won some awards or prizes. I mean, that's the prizes and awards thing is not everything, but definitely it says something, especially if it's a prize or an award that is respected in the world, in that universe. So absolutely. And entrepreneurship is an interesting, tricky thing. So um, I want to say, and this is a general thing, but also a very important thing. Like, that X factor that's going to get you the job or get you the interview versus the X factor that does not might really come down to everything else that you do. So in other words, here the equalizing factors are going to be this. All of the applicants that they bring to campus, for example, let's say to the final interviews, are going to have a doctorate. right? That's usually the requirement. Everyone's going to have a doctorate. They're going to have a doctorate probably from all decent schools or programs. They're going to have really great letters of recommendation. They're going to have they're going to demonstrate the fact that let's say specifically for composer jobs that they've done, a decent amount of composition. They can compose. They can probably do whatever it is that program needs to do, either acoustic or electronic or some combination, right? So all of those things, usually by that point, that's an even playing field. So some X factors might be, what have you done outside of music? Now, I actually have been, um, I think I've been helped by the fact that I spent 10 years outside of academia before even going back and getting my doctorate. And I worked in the music industry. Now, I worked both as an independent record producer. I worked for my father, who is a composer, and I did a lot of sort of stuff for him. I started my own business, so I was an entrepreneur. I started a business selling music software and hardware. I became an ambassador for Sibelius software. Back in 1998, I was an alpha tester for Sibelius and then a beta tester for Sibelius. Um, so I was like, I had a web-based store in 1998 that was, before all of this other stuff came, like before it became a thing to have to like go to Musician's Friend or whatever. Um, so I was sort of in on that, beginning sort of internet entrepreneur level. And I learned a lot about, I went to band directors associations, to church musician associations to basically sell software with boxes of Sibelius. But I sold Finale and I sold Pro Tools and I sold all of that stuff, but I also used it so I could demonstrate it. Um, so like I did a whole lot of stuff. So then when it came time for me to get hired, I could speak to my professional experience as being able to bring that and map that into the classroom and to my students. So I could say, hey, by the way, this is what it's like to be this is what it's like to fill out a, a tax form as a business or as a sole proprietorship, or, I ran a nonprofit and I currently run a nonprofit. So, I've done all of that and nobody told me to do it and I didn't learn it in school. That goes back to my first slide, or one of the first slides. Getting a PhD doesn't mean you're going to get a job, and also doesn't mean that you're good at anything. Um, I'm not here to talk about like whether I'm good as a composer, but I know that I've done a lot of things and I've had a lot of experience. And so I'm able to, like, my cover letter hits all of that. And so, or, now I can also hit all my academic stuff. So that's another story. But so whatever you have, Emily, as value added that you feel you can bring as a strength to your application, your entrepreneurship stuff, you ran a festival, you worked, you built websites for a composer, you did this, like whatever you can say that you can sort of bring in as an extra dimension. Because here's the thing, the difference between you and someone next to you is very small, and it's just that little bit that might actually get you the job and also might help you keep your job once you get it. And the composer performer thing, by the way, that you mentioned, that's also good too. I mean, you should absolutely play that up. Play the fact that that you play very well and that you commission pieces or do whatever. Like those are all important things to bring into the equation that go beyond your cover letter, your CV, and your stack of scores. Okay. I know I've got a couple questions from the internet audience, but I know Josh was the next person on the list, and then Jiyun. Yeah, good question. Um, well, the first thing is you have to try as much as you can to separate yourself from you and try to read the letter as if you're not you, and then see if you sound interesting. And I know it's really hard to do, okay? Like that's like a hard process to like go, am I interesting on a cover letter? Now, cover letters aren't really meant to be entertaining, but you need to front load. Well, two things. We didn't really talk about the specific dynamics of the cover letter. Cover letters are interesting. You need to get to the point. You need to address everything that's in, and this is Josh, this is a tangent, but it's an important one. You need to address everything that's in that job description and how you can meet that. So if the job description says we want somebody with experience teaching um, um, the music of Charles Ives or whatever, I mean, just I'm randomly picking. And let's say you have taught a seminar on Charles Ives or whatever, or you're a Charles Ives scholar. You got to hit that. You got to say, oh well, my years of doing this and make me qualified to teach your Charles Ives seminar or whatever the case may be. You need to hit that, and you need to hit that up front pretty quick, because when a committee reads a cover letter, um, if you don't get their attention in the first paragraph, it's probably likely they're going to stop, especially in the first round, and going to go jump. Okay, there's got to be something in the first couple paragraphs that's going to grab them, because they just don't have time to read. If your cover letter is 2 pages long, by the way, your cover letter should never be more than 2 pages long. 2 pages is fine. And in fact, I would argue that you should probably, even if like 1 page is a little bit too short, that 1 page probably is too short. About a page and a half double spaced is a pretty ideal place to be. Um, now, so you need to. The answer to that, Josh, is like, what is the job asking? Hit those, and then what do you have that you feel is um, unique that perhaps other composers, teachers, whatever the case may be, other applicants may not have, that you should put up front, because you need to kind of get that up front too, but but don't just shove it in there. If you can tie that value added thing that you do, the thing that you do that you think, or the things that you do that you think are, separate you from many of the other applicants, if you can tie that in and then wrap that into like what the job is asking you to do, what they're listing, that's the best way to do it. Because if you just randomly put that stuff up front, it's going to seem a little forced. Now, if your value added stuff doesn't hit any of the job points, hit the job points, talk about your experience as a composer, your experience as a teacher, what past teaching experiences you have, and then towards the end, say, and also dot dot dot, right? Because there's no other place to put it. You have to do your teaching experience and then your composing or professional research experience up after you hit the points. So your first paragraph is introduction. Your second paragraph is, what are my strengths that can hit all the job points? Then your third paragraph is either teaching or research or composing. And you have to flip those paragraphs, because if the job is more teaching centered, put the teaching first, then put the composition or research or creative work. If it's more like a composition job and maybe like at a Research One institution, or like a not like a regional campus type of thing where teaching might not be the main thing they want you to do, it's maybe more equal, then maybe put the composition stuff up front and then do the teaching. But either or, and then whatever else that you can add to the pile. Like typically, like I put all my work as a producer and my work as an entrepreneur, I tend to have a whole paragraph about that, but that's below all the other things. So what that assumes is that I've done work to pull the reader in to read the rest of the letter. Whether I've been successful or not, I've been successful. I've probably been successful at least 5 or 6 times, because I've gotten hired 5 or 6 times, but I've also probably failed, depending on who the reader is, a number of times, because I've applied for a lot of jobs. Here's a statistic if you want to know a stat. My first time applying, so this was the fall of 2007 into 2008. So this would be for hiring for the 2008, which was my first job that I landed IU East. I applied for 78 jobs. Okay. Now, they were mixed. They weren't all full-time jobs. They weren't all, I mean, they were all full-time jobs, but like some of them were community colleges. Some of them, you know, some of them were like the jobs I knew I wasn't ever going to get, like some, you know, like the University of Michigan or something. It wasn't Michigan, but like there were some of those jobs. And then there were a lot of kind of the other jobs. And I applied for them. Some of them were kind of on the edge of my level of experience, but a lot of them I could do. Like I said, I could do this. I could teach that. I could do this. I've got experience doing that. So I kind of hit as much as I could. And yes, I spent a lot of time at Starbucks. Actually, it was Dunn Brothers in Minneapolis, in uptown Minneapolis, which is now no longer there. It's a Jersey Mike's, and I'm so sad that it's gone away. But that's another story. But I applied for 78 jobs. I applied for 78 jobs. I got 6 phone interviews and 2 on-site interviews and 1 job offer. So that's your metric. I don't mean to make a pin drop in the room. That's just reality. Now I could go through and pull. I didn't apply for that many jobs when I applied for like this job, and I applied for some of the other positions. Actually, one of them was just a phone. Somebody gave me a phone call and said apply, and then I applied. That was just for a 1-year visiting position. That sometimes happens, but for like this Roger Williams job that I got, and for other, like when I applied for jobs and got interviews and I've gotten offers, and I was already tenure track here, because that happens. So you can even apply for jobs. You should apply for jobs, by the way, even when you have your tenure track job. Don't stop applying for jobs, because until you get tenure, there's no guarantee, and you don't owe the school that you're working with any loyalty until they give you tenure. Then you owe them loyalty. But until they give you tenure, you don't owe them anything. Okay? You are probationary. Okay? They're checking you out, and at the same time, you're checking them out. So you should play the field until you get that letter from the Board of Trustees and the president saying that you are tenured and promoted. Okay? So I played the field all the way up until 2019. I even played the field a little bit after that, but that's just because I applied for a few jobs that looked interesting to me. But you should always apply. The number was less. I think it might have been 55 or 60 or something like this when I applied for this Roger Williams job. But you should, if you're not applying for more than about 30 or 40 jobs, you're probably going to really lower your chances of actually getting an interview. It's kind of, the odds are definitely like less than getting a hit in a Major League Baseball game, even if you're a poor hitter, right? If your batting average is 300, you're doing really great when it comes to this. But if your batting average is probably going to be about maybe 200 in terms of getting follow-ups. Okay, so look at it this way. Look at it from like a batting average point of view if you're a baseball fan. So Josh, did that help, or do you want me to chisel in a little further? Uh, so Ji-Yoon, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please correct me. Okay, great. Some schools ask teaching demo slash teaching video. Can you share if you have any of those experiences? Yeah, absolutely. That's really kind of interesting. They'll ask you, can send us a lecture in your music theory or whatever the case may be. And um, uh, I've done it like 5 times, 5 or 6 times, and actually the technology was not like today, where you've even a cell phone will record pretty well if you have a position. Like I think the best one I did was I had like an old like Gen 2 iPad on like a chair in the back of a classroom. And I just recorded like one of my music theory lectures. You should record a real lecture. So like it should be a real thing. Like if you are currently teaching and you're like even as an adjunct or whatever the case may be, like video yourself actually teaching, like actually interacting with students, and teaching some subject. Usually what happens is that when they're asking for a teaching demo, they're not going to tell you, please teach us a lesson on the augmented sixth chord. Like that's, you can expect something like that when you go and do an interview. They're actually going to say, we want you to teach, sonata allegro form, or we want you to, teach a composition lesson, whatever the case may be. Um, that just varies. It usually depends on where the students are in the unit or whatever. But if they're just asking for a demo of you teaching, do a demo of you actually teaching. Now, if you're not teaching, so if you're currently unemployed in terms of teaching, that becomes more difficult because then it becomes more sterile. Best thing I can say is find something that you know that you have maybe taught before, and then do a fake teaching thing in front of, like, invite, well, it was COVID, but I mean, invite some friends over and just like do it. And try to make it look good. Try to make it sound good. Like they want to hear what you say and they want to hear your interactions more than watch you. Although the video part, I think they're interested in your classroom demeanor. They're interested in your body language with students. Um, you know, that's so hit and miss. But yeah, I don't have much more to add on that. But if they ask for something specific, give them what they ask for. Like, so if they say we want you to be teaching a theory demo, don't don't give them a teaching lecture on um, you know, the um, Stravinsky in Paris or something. I mean, I'm trying to like think of something, or like something about musicology that's interesting to you, or that you're going to talk about, how to use how you put together a piece of music as a composer, whatever the case may be. Like, give them what they ask for. And also don't make it longer or shorter than what they ask for. So if they say we want 10 minutes, just like I said before, follow instructions, give them 10 minutes. Now, it doesn't have to be like, if it's a 50-minute lecture, record all 50 minutes and grab the best 10 minutes you got, or edit it down into 10 minutes out of that 50-minute lecture. Cut out the part where, the student comes in late and brings you coffee or whatever the case may be, and then you end up talking about what happened last night, or I mean, whatever. Like, you can cut all that stuff out. Just give them what they're asking for, because they don't have time to watch more than what they ask for. And usually they'll only watch the first few minutes of it. So try to be interesting in the first, say, 4 or 5 minutes. Um, it's sort of like the cover letter. Pull them in a little bit in that first few minutes. So whatever is interesting in that, in your lecture, like put up front. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Other questions or thoughts or comments? We do have some. Again, those on the Zoom session, feel free to ask anything. Um, oh, hey Victor, how you doing, man? So Victor's a composer and former student of my father's from back in the day. Any advice for an old man who's thinking of looking for visiting professor positions in the deep South? um, visit, find a church. Yeah, find that Baptist church. Find your minister. Um, uh, Well, visiting positions, if that's what you're really interested in. And so some people, because of their life situation, are really only interested in things like maybe adjuncting or some visiting positions or whatever the case may be. Obviously, comb the search, uh, the job search sites, find out, because usually about this time of year is when all the visiting positions get advertised, because this is usually when programs have awarded, let's say, a sabbatical release, and might just have been awarded, like, the provost authorized money for a visiting position, okay, whatever the case might be. So like look now, like now's the time to look. If you're interested in doing visiting teaching work, look now. Um, and um, and for Deep South, yeah, like to Josh, what Josh said, um, know your local church. Uh, so Ian, let's see. Before I get to Ian, Samshin, if you're still watching, sorry, I know that you've asked your question a little bit ago, but I'm trying to go around here. Um, for us composers, what is considered research? And the follow-up question is it worth it for job prospects for composers to dish out money for competition applications, festivals, or even recordings? Okay, very good questions. And then Ian, get to you. So first thing is, what is considered research for a composer? Your music. And don't let anybody tell you that it's not research, because that's just plain wrong. That's what I was saying before. Whenever you go for when you're going up for promotion and tenure, you're going to put your music first. If you're a composer, like it doesn't matter whether you're teaching music theory or teaching music, like I've taught all of that. I've been teaching music theory since I started this gig in 2008. I taught music history. I've taught Western music history. I've taught jazz. I've taught some non-Western stuff. I mean, in other words, I'm not an expert in any of it, but I've taught it, right? But none of that is my research. It's not my strength. I'm a composer first. So my composition, I had to make a case that my compositions were my research. Now, that wasn't a hard case for me to sell, because there's precedents, right? So that's important to remember. And don't let a school or someone else tell you that, oh no, man, you need to publish an article on, you know, Stamitz's trumpet concertos or something, like whatever the case may be. Like, no, you don't. You need to focus on your music, and that is your research. And you need to say that research and creative work are equivalent. And So hopefully that helps. And the other thing about uh, to dish out money for competitions, festivals, and recordings. Okay, I'm going to hold that because I want to answer that question, but I want to get to Ian's question first, and then I want to answer that one. So, do you think that there would be an uptick in position openings post-COVID, or do you think that colleges are still continuing to shrink with lesser amount of applications? It's plus minus. Some programs are actually flourishing. I know, and weirdly enough, actually, they're flourishing in the South and they're flourishing in the Southwest, and that's actually also a function of demographics. So, um, populations are increasing in the South and decreasing in the North. So what's going to end up happening is that regardless of COVID, there's a shrinking piece of pie for college age students or college eligible students in northern climes, especially in the Northeast. There's been something of an exodus of people in the Northeast, but there's also, generally speaking, people are just in the Northeast are having less children, and there was a kind of a gap of people not having as many kids back around 9/11. And so we're experiencing that now. Now we're getting to that point where we have just lesser numbers of high school graduates, and this will be the case, I think, out to about 2028 before it starts to reverse trends, because basically you have to look at birth trends, you have to look at that, and population trends and censuses and stuff like this. Trust me, schools look at this. My school is looking at this very carefully because we're in the Northeast and we're dealing with a shrinking piece of pie. The president talks about this every time he talks to us. So, so that having been said, um, that was happening without COVID. COVID throws a wrinkle. COVID is a curveball. I don't know what the I don't know what the situation will be after COVID. No one really does. I mean, when let's say this upcoming year might be the next, like this incoming class will probably be the last class that will be really severely affected by COVID in terms of things like enrollments or whatever. probably the class of 20 or the incoming class in 2022. So the class of 2026 will be the first class where things could conceivably return back to pre-COVID levels. But, a lot of schools haven't made it. There are a lot of schools that have not made it, but also those schools had their, like the clock was ticking on them to begin with, and COVID was the thing that put them over the edge. I mean, we've heard about Ithaca College, where, they just canceled their whole, yeah, well, so there you have it, right? I would have never thought in a million years that that would have happened, but it did. Mills College, like the famous Mills College, where that was the hotbed for experimental music and all that sort of San Francisco Tape Center and all that stuff. They're After next year, it's all over. They're just going to become some kind of institute or something. So and those are just some high profile ones. And so I don't know. It's not rosy, but I will say that there are programs that are thriving. University of Florida in Gainesville they're being very selective because they're getting more applicants than they've ever gotten before, and they're getting more applicants even in the graduate program, in the doctoral program. A friend of mine who teaches there, they're I've got several friends actually. Jim, who commented, one thing I believe doctoral students fail to do well during their time in the academy is networking. That's true. But anyway, so there are programs that are doing well, and this could be the result of how things are shifting, where some programs are shuttering, and therefore those that pool of people who would normally maybe apply to go there apply to go somewhere else. So that also comes back, Ian, to your question about do you focus in one area? And the answer to that is, it doesn't make sense if you want to get a job to limit your geography. You might end up having to teach in Florida or in Alabama or something like this. And that's fine. At least you don't have to deal with shoveling snow in the wintertime, right? And there's a big plus there. So, all right. So getting back to Samson's question about spending money for competitions, festivals, or recordings. So, okay, that's another subject. But how it relates to our current subject is, padding your resume, if you will, with opportunities. Um, with a few exceptions, I tend to be one of those people that leans on the side of don't spend a lot of money on applications for anything. Recording is different. Recording is different because recording actually costs money to do. So unless you've got a benefactor, spending money on recordings can be a good thing, especially to get a professional recording. So that's off to the side. But for things like competitions and festivals, if they're asking for money, if it's not like a highly legit thing that's been around for a long time, where it has a lot of, like, for example, the American Academy in Rome, like the Rome Prize, that I consider every year I apply for that, I consider that it's a tax deduction. I just consider that my tax deduction for the year to the American Academy in Rome because I never get it. And I probably will never get it, but I'll keep applying because I'm an idiot. But the other thing is like something like what's the other one that has a job application? I think the Guggenheim does. No, I can't remember. But there are a few that are totally legit that are worth applying. Like, and they're not that big. We're talking $30, $25, whatever the case may be. But if it's like some new music group that is going to play your piece once and they want $25, I'm like, come on. Like, I don't know. That's my attitude about it. I run a summer program in Italy. Some of you know about it, Alba program. I never charge. Look, the amount of work it takes me to organize everything and do everything, I could charge an application fee just to accommodate my time, but I'm not going to do that to my applicants. It's not fair. Most of them don't have any money, and I have to charge them tuition, and I wish I couldn't because I don't have a support of a big institution, or I don't have any grant money that can offset that. I hope to change that in the future. But I'm not going to charge them an application fee for something that they're going to pay for in terms of tuition, no matter how good the program is. And I think it's a really good program. So I don't think application fees are really worth it unless it's a really great, 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 amazing thing. So Samshin, that's my 2 cents on it. Anyone else welcome to chime in on that subject? Please do. Garrett has a question. I don't know if anybody from the Zoom room has any questions or comments. But Garrett Fuller, hi Garrett. Speaking of one of the applicants for the ALBA program, would you mind touching on the teaching options available for someone post master's degree? Good question. So here's the thing. The general rule of thumb, if you don't know this, is that you can teach up to the previous level of where you have your degree. So, in other words, if you have a master's degree, that qualifies you to teach undergraduates, but you can't teach master's level. I mean, that's basically the way that works, right? That's why graduate teaching assistants always teach undergraduate classes. You never teach graduate classes. Um, if you get a doctorate, that means you can teach everybody up through the doctoral level. It's kind of the way that works. So basically, then, Garrett, you're yeah, unless you're at NEC, in which case you don't get that chance. Well, that's another story. Um, so um, so Garrett, what you could teach, and actually the places to look for teaching are going to be community colleges. Community colleges usually, oh, it might be changing now, but historically community colleges didn't have the requisite that you needed to be a doctor to teach in a community college. So look for community colleges in your area, and oftentimes you can do adjunct teaching in a community college pretty much just by sending in your CV or making a phone call and say, do you need anybody to teach your training classes, or your intro to music, where you basically teach kids how to clap on 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. Yeah, you could do that. But in terms of like full-time long-term teaching, yeah, you're going to need to get the doctorate for that. But I think your best options, Garrett, would be community music schools and community colleges, and that master's degree could then be useful. I actually taught for one fall at a Jewish community center in Malden, Massachusetts, when I had just gotten my master's degree in music, and I taught like 2 little things. I taught one for like little kids, basically, which is essentially gave the teachers time to have lunch while I babysat the kids. Basically, what that was. But like basically adults who just wanted to know like what G clef was. So Garrett, was that helpful? If you're still listening. Um, okay, folks, any other questions or thoughts or comments or everything and anything you ever wanted to know? I mean, this time is yours. I don't have a end time. I know we can't probably go forever, but there's probably a lot of stuff that, a lot of questions you might have that I haven't touched on. Um, so Ian asks, how long should you spend in ABD as a doctoral candidate? Not too long is the answer to that question. Yeah. So, my philosophy is this: once you're ABD, get it done. Just get it done. Don't waste any time. Just do whatever you need to do to get that doctorate and get out. Because the longer you're ABD, unless you have like some great funding, the longer you're ABD, um, you know, uh, uh, first of all, it doesn't make you qualified to get a lot of the jobs, even jobs that advertise for AB, like they say doctorate or ABD will be considered. Trust me, they're not considering ABD. So everyone remember this well. When they have 150 applications on the floor, and the committee needs to get through those applications to get to the cream of the crop, and you've got an ABD, you're not getting to the next round. Just, you can send your application and hope somehow somebody pulls it off the pile and says, wow, this person's great. But if you're ABD, you're against a lot of people who are walking around with pieces of paper that say doctor on it. So, Ian, get it done. How many years? Well, I mean, I don't know what your PhD requirements are. Every school kind of has some different ones. For me, I just had to write a piece. Oh, sorry, Ian, you wanted to say what it was, right? Hmm. Okay, cool. Right, right. Actually, I think in your case, Ian, you would be really maybe well suited for, look at the community colleges, like if you want to just try to get some teaching and maybe earn a little money, that would be something for you to do as ABD, and you could stay local. Look for any adjunct positions like, Northeastern or Tops or whatever, because, their adjunct calls are pretty much all over the place. They're buried. You're not going to see an adjunct call in like College Music Society. You're going to have to actually go to the human resources website of the school and actually see if there's an adjunct call in there. And usually there is. And it's usually an ongoing rotation where they'll just sort of get your CV and look at it. And there you reach out. You reach out to the department and say, are you looking for any adjuncts? I have people writing me all the time. I mean, well, not all the time, but I at least get a half a dozen emails every semester from people who are just shooting in the dark, who are just saying, hey, I've got my doctorate or I'm ABD and I'm living in the area. Do you need anybody to teach X, Y, and Z? And they'll sometimes attach their CV. And I'll reply and I'll be friendly and I'll say, we don't need anybody right now, but if we do, we'll. So it, you're going to get shot down a lot, but you should definitely try. But that having been said, for the ABD thing, just write yourself a piece. Like whatever your next piece is, make that your dissertation, and just get it done. I mean, obviously run it through your advisors first. I mean, whoever your advisor is, just clear it. Make sure that, hey, I'm going to write a piece. This is going to be my string quartet number two, or I mean whatever it might be, and just like get it done and get that you know wear the do the ceremony, get the cap and gown, do the walk, have a great dinner, drink a bottle of wine, and then get on with your life, because you've already spent a lot of time being a student. It's really nice to not be a student after a while, although I love being a student. I don't get me wrong, I love learning and I love being a student, but boy, it felt so nice to like just be done. It was like, wow, I'm a doctor now. And now everybody who I used to call professor, I can now use their first name. Right? That was actually really cool. Whenever I like peek into an office and I say, you know, hey David, to David Damschroeder, you know, um, who's David now? He's not Dr. Damschroeder anymore, because we're colleagues. So I don't know if that's helpful, Ian. I mean, if you need time, take the time to do it, but don't wait. Like there's no benefit in spending 7 years ABD. There's just no benefit to it. Sure, a lot of programs won't, but there's a lot of times PhDs tend to linger like before they actually become PhDs. So there's no benefit to getting a job. Your cover letter should never start with um, you'll be happy to know that I spent 6 years ABD. Like, that's not going to engender you into the committee in any positive way. That's going to be like, well, why did this person take so long to get the PhD? Like, that's actually going to that actually could be looked as a point of suspicion. Like, maybe this person had some problems with the committee, like their doctoral committee. Maybe they were asked to do it again. Like, so my advice, get it done and then let everybody call you doctor and open the door for you. So, let's see. Other questions. Oh, Ben. Hey, Ben. Thanks for sharing this early great presentation. Do you have suggestions for people who graduate with a DMA but want to work outside of academia for a while and then go back to college? Yeah, so that's interesting. So you remember I told you the story uh, about the fact that I took 10 years off between my master's and my doctorate. Um, and then I went back and got my doctorate. If you're interested in taking some time off from academia, the best time to do that is probably either between your undergrad and your master's or between your master's and your doctorate. However, once you get your doctorate, it's like a piece of bread. It goes stale after a while. And this, we haven't talked about that. The I have a dear friend, wonderful composer, and good teacher who never could get himself a full-time job, and I think deserves it, or deserved it. And part of that is just whatever circumstances that led to him failing, getting a job out of the gate, and he got a degree from a top music school, tip top. Um, Whatever combinations of life and situation, he wasn't able to get a job. And so eventually, and he got some adjuncting and he got some part-time stuff and whatever. So it wasn't like he was completely out of academia. Eventually, though, it gets stale. And, here's another thing, and I hate to say this, ageism is real. Even though, look, all the diversity initiatives and et cetera, and we want to hire people of all kinds, ageism should be part of that, and it usually is addressed in an HR, but it's actually kind of low on the list, And so if you are, if you've been lingering with your PhD for too long, the difference between you lingering for 5 or 6 years with your PhD and not having had any real substantive employment in academia, and then the fresh upstart who comes fresh out of school with a PhD, and let's say that, all other things are more or less equal, they're going to go for the younger person. I hate to tell you that. Youth matters in this regard. Even somebody with all my experience, I can't directly pinpoint it, but I am almost sure that I have been on the receiving end of ageism several times, um, despite the fact that I have a tremendous experience as a teacher and all this other stuff, right? I mean, I'm trying to float my own boat here, but in other words, it happens. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get the job. It just means it might be harder if you wait too long. And so, Ben, I think part of this is it depends on what you're doing outside of it. So if all you're doing is like, you do some adjunct work and maybe you work at Pizza Hut and, I mean, like if you're just doing that, that's dangerous because you wait too long and eventually it's going to spoil. Your PhD is like has a shelf life. It will spoil, and then it'll just become a nice piece of paper that you can say, hey, it's great. I got a PhD. You call me doctor, but I don't have a job. So having said that, if you're, let's say you're though gonna go to Europe to study with somebody, and you're gonna do that for 2 years, you're gonna and you're gonna hit the festival circuit, or you're going to start a business in music, like you're going to start a publishing company, or you're going to start a nonprofit, and you're going to do something that's relevant to your career and to your industry, that shows that you're kind of doing something that you can't do in academia, but you just have to take advantage of that. Then that could work in your advantage, because then what happens is you can say, well, I received my PhD 7 years ago, but what I did is I decided to do all of this because this is important, and this is how it feeds into what you're asking for me to teach my 9 a.m. Music ear training sections or whatever the case may be. But it's going to be one of those things like what Josh asked, something about like how to add your value added stuff. If you're going to genuinely be doing value added work outside of your doctorate that you can only do outside of academia, then that I would say by all means do that. So Ben, I think it just depends on what you want to do. Um, some people get doctorates just because they want to get a doctorate, because they wanted to study with somebody and they wanted the time. and they're not really that interested in academia. They might do it because it seems like they should do it. So, that's the other thing. I it seems like everybody's here because they're interested in doing this for a career. But if your heart's not in it, if your heart's not in it, people will sense that. Like if you don't really like teaching and you don't really like dealing with 20 somethings in a classroom who can be a real pain in the ass, trust me, I'm constantly, quote unquote, like air quote, yelling at my students about because, they forget, they're like goldfish. They forget what I told them on Wednesday. So, if you don't, but I like that. I feel like I'm helping them grow up still because they're still kids, right? So I like that. And I like that challenge, even if it's frustrating. But if you don't, that's a problem because that's probably what you're going to do. You're probably going to be spending an extra couple hours with a student who can't pitch match. And there's just there trying to get them to like match middle C. And that might be, believe it or not, that might be like a lot of what you do. And if you're not interested in that, the job of like, again, that being the composer with the scarf around your neck and you come in and you teach that 1 hour orchestration class and then you leave and then you fly to Europe to have your premiere and you come back 3 weeks later and there's no consequences because everyone's like, sure, he went to Europe for 3 weeks. He doesn't have to do that committee work. That is very rare. There's only like a handful of jobs that actually that to whom those apply. They're usually big names, and that's not you because that person is not going to be spending 3 hours with his or her student on trying to pitch match middle C because that student just can't hear it. So, definitely ask yourself if you really want to do this because we don't need more applications out there that for people that don't have their heart into it. But if you love doing it, then by all means do it. Like I said, I'm not here to talk you out of it, and I'm not here to talk you into it. Okay, other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything. I give people another moment here to maybe respond or a little bit of a time delay. How Zoom candidates, Zoom folks, how are you guys doing? Am I answering everything you ever wanted to know? Okay, good. Good. Thumbs up. Yep. Okay, great. Melissa, you haven't asked any questions. I'm not trying to pull you out, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you would like to know or have any questions or clarifications on. Um, Ben, thanks. Very helpful. I should be finished with my DMA by 29. Okay. I was planning to have some quote real experience as a freelance composer before diving in the job market. Okay, good point about ageism, but I hope that's not a thing when I'm 33. Yeah, chances are, Ben, you're okay because you're still young. I like to think that 50 is the new 30, so like I'm still young, and sometimes my sense of humor is that of a 12-year-old. So I mean, your all mileages vary. But Ben, you're probably okay. And if you're going to take like say 3 or 4 years off to like focus on your career as a composer, and if you can demonstrate that by definitely showing that you've had a record of success, so like whatever you've done, like you've done some recording projects, you've maybe wrote that opera that you always wanted to write, and you've collaborated, maybe you've mounted it, maybe you went to some festivals and you did this, and like if you have to show that activity, and you have to show that that activity was definitely pushing you forward, then you're okay. And actually, I would say the same thing, Ian, for you as well. Like if you like that sort of falls in the ABD territory. Like, what are you going to do during that ABD? Because if it takes you I don't want to say 7 years, if it takes you 3 years to write a piece of music, that's a problem. But if you write that piece of music and it takes you 3 years to kind of do all of the little jump through all the hoops that to kind of get the final piece of paper, but you also did other things and that you can kind of show the activity, then that might be okay too. I just worry about having that ABD sort of stretch on a little bit longer than it needs to. Um, and Ben, don't take too much time away. Like it depends. Like you might actually have like really hit stride. You might win the Rome Prize, and then you might like win a Guggenheim, or you might get nominated for the Academy of Arts and Letters. Like in other words, you actually might like take off, and then you at some point you might be like, oh yeah, I've got that doctorate. Like maybe I should teach now. And if you've got a career, like you know, you won a Pulitzer at the age of 33 or whatever the case may be. I mean, whatever you may think of the Pulitzer as a prize, you might win it. And if you win it, great. I mean, that probably will get you high on the pile then because you've done a lot of important work. And if you've hit stride as a composer in your career, and then you decide you want to go back and do some teaching because you really want to do it, then that absolutely will be beneficial. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else come in terms of questions from my Zoom panel or from my YouTube or my Facebook feed. Um, so I think I'll probably wrap up. Again, there was no hard set finishing, but we're at 4:27, so 4:30 feels like a good, that's a good little wrap up time. Um, so Zoom folks, just stick on for a second while I say goodbye to the live stream so I can say kind of goodbye to you guys off camera, as it were. But I think for the rest of you publicly watching, and thank you very much for all of this. I'm gonna maybe switch over to my other camera, which is my opening camera, which it should be there. Um, Ben, I needed this perspective. Cheers and thanks again. Yeah, folks. Hopefully my other camera's working. Yes, it is. So thank you so much for tuning in. I know that I took maybe longer than I thought I was going to take, but I also knew this is a huge subject, and maybe if there's enough interest for me to follow up on like one particular thing, like maybe run a workshop. And so if anybody would like for me to like run like a workshop, like let me look at people's cover letters and I'll read it and tell you if I think you're interesting. Like that might be useful. So stay tuned for that. Like put in the chat, in the comments, things you'd like me to do. Like if maybe some real targeted kind of workshopy, webinar-y things that revolve around this big, complicated subject that often does not get talked about. So again, I appreciate it very much. I wish everybody a great rest of the day. It's got beautiful weather here. It's warm. It feels like summer actually here in Northeast. So stay safe, practice responsible social distancing, and I will see all of you on my next live stream. And again, the Zoomers stay on. So, okay, bye everybody. Bye for now.